The Jets pass on a big-name receiver, and the legal tampering period begins in the NFL. All of that and more on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, March 14th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you for making this show your first listen or your first watch every day. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button. You'll get notifications as new episodes are posted. And if you're watching on YouTube, please give this a thumbs up. It helps the channel out. It helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. And our episode today is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, the legal tampering period begins in the NFL today. It's kind of the unofficial beginning of free agency. Noon Eastern time, teams will begin to speak with the agents of free agents. We'll talk about that a little bit further ahead here on the show, but there was a trade struck over the weekend as the Dallas Cowboys send star receiver Amari Cooper to the Cleveland Browns for a 5th-round pick, and the teams will swap 6th-rounders. It's a move that I think has relevance for the Jets because, and I've talked about this, I think priority number one for this team this offseason, they got to add an impact receiver. And if you look through the league, the last week or so, pretty much all of the players who could be considered impact receivers have kind of gone off the board. You have Davante Adams getting the franchise tag in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers remaining a Packer. Although, if you're following the news Monday morning, that could change. And that's an important thing to remember this week if you're following this podcast. This stuff I'm saying on a show could be out of date by the time an episode is posted. So, keep that in mind as you're watching. And I hopefully we'll stay pretty up to date. But this week, a lot's going to change in the NFL. But, Davante Adams goes off the board, at least for now. Calvin Ridley gets suspended. Chris Godwin gets franchised. Mike Williams agrees to a new deal with the Chargers. Suddenly, the options, if you want to add an impact receiver, are very limited. And Amari Cooper was really kind of the last guy available. And, to be fair to the Jets, Amari Cooper's getting traded probably for a reason. The second time he's been traded, I'm not going to act like he's Jerry Rice. He had kind of a down year last year, did not go for 1,000 yards. But still, I look at this situation and it's not so much Amari Cooper, but it's kind of like, what's the plan here? Because if you look at the season Zach Wilson had last year, rookie quarterback really had a lot of struggles. If you're going to continue with Zach Wilson, you got to do everything in your power to build as good of a team as possible around him and give him like a premium receiving target. So it's not so much that I'm mourning the loss of Amari Cooper, who, any player, there could be things happening that we don't know about. Again, second time he's being traded, the Cowboys did not prioritize him. But I don't know what the alternative is. And that's the thing that concerns me. It's not Amari Cooper. It's where's the option the Jets go to? I mean, are they going to get into the mix with Davante Adams? I mean, I kind of doubt it. And the other thing is, if you listen to the explanation that was coming from the Jets on Saturday, and there was no official statement, but there were enough reporters close to the team who were saying the same thing that kind of seems like it was coming from the Jets. The Jets were acting like they could not afford Amari Cooper, which was not true. And I saw multiple reporters claim that it would destroy the Jets' cap flexibility. That's not the case. The Jets could have, even in a world where the Jets could not afford his current salary, that deal was very easy to restructure to cut his 2022 cap number down. They could have struck it. They could have just torn it up and reached a new deal with him. They could have cut guys like Sheldon Rankins and Greg Van Roten and Ryan Griffin. And just those 3 cuts alone would have paid 60% of Amari Cooper's cap hit for 2020. So if the Jets are saying that, that's not true. But if the Jets are saying that, that may suggest that maybe receiver is not the priority that maybe I think it is, or maybe you think it is. Because that's the type of thing you say if you think adding a guy like an Amari Cooper is a luxury. So I don't really know what's going on. And I know the response could be, well, they'll just draft somebody. And listen, should the Jets be interested in drafting a receiver high this year? Absolutely. No question about it. Just good team building. can you expect a receiver the Jets draft this year to come in and make an immediate big-time impact? Well, that's a lot to ask. The draft is not about filling immediate needs. I say this all the time. I've been saying this for years. And maybe maybe it doesn't apply quite as much to guys picked in the top 10, where the Jets have 2 picks this year, but it's very difficult to count on rookies to come in and make an immediate impact. It just really is. I mean, I did an article 2 years ago, and now granted you have 2 years that it would have to be updated, but 2 years ago I looked into this. Even receivers who end up Pro Bowlers in their careers, guys who end up being great receivers, the top receivers in the league, again, if you make a Pro Bowl, I looked at this. As a rookie, they average like 600 to 700 yards. And I think, you look at a Jamar Chase, who's an outlier, and you maybe fool yourself into thinking that's the expected. It's not the expected outcome. If you draft somebody, they could turn out to be a great player. And again, the draft is for long-term player development. It's about getting a guy you think can be a player for you for 8 to 10 years. It's not about filling this need this year. There are some wonderful prospects at the receiver position. I don't know that any of them are going to be the type of guys you count on to go in and make an immediate impact. I mean, last decade, there have been 10 receivers who went for 1,000 yards as a rookie in 10 years. So essentially, if you look at that, you have to get the best receiver in the draft class, which, in fairness, okay, the Jets pick 4, the Jets pick 10. Maybe, I mean, their odds are better than a lot of teams would be, but it's not a great strategy to go into the draft needing something. I never want to go into the draft needing a position, because that's where you make mistakes. Because, well, what happens if the guy you want gets picked before you? The Jets aren't picking 1. The guy they want could end up being drafted before them. What if, like, the best player on your board who doesn't play receiver, and you have him ranked higher than any of your receivers, what if he falls to you? Then are you stuck picking a receiver? And I go back to what you're expecting from a rookie. You got a young quarterback here. You already have another young receiver in Elijah Moore. I think you want a veteran. I think you want to add somebody. So, where do you go from here? Are you going to bank on an Allen Robinson rejuvenation? Are you going to bank on, Juju Smith-Schuster? It'd be more than a rejuvenation. It'd be like a resurrection of his career. A guy who was a 1,400-yard receiver 4 years ago and still relatively young. But I don't know what direction the Jets are going. I mean, are they working out a deal for DK Metcalf? Listen, I'm not going to throw in the towel here. I'm not going to sit here on this Monday before, frankly, most of the player movement's begun and declare that this offseason is a complete failure. But to me, I don't think you can view this offseason as a success if you don't come away from it with a guy who's going to be a big-time receiver, who's going to be a plug-and-play kind of guy. And I'm not talking about a draft pick. Because right now you look at this roster, you look at the receiver position, you've got Corey Davis and Elijah Moore. You don't even have a third starter right now at the receiver position. And, I guess you could go for like a third-tier free agent, but is that really what you want? By the way, if you go for like a third-tier free agent, that means you can't suffer an injury. If you suffer an injury to either Corey Davis or Elijah Moore, both of whom missed significant time last year, then you're going to have a lot of trouble. So it's not about Amari Cooper. It's about what are the alternatives here, and what's the plan at the wide receiver position? Because it seems like the Jets kind of missed an opportunity. Maybe again, I don't want to go overboard, because you do this long enough, you realize that sometimes things are happening behind the scenes with a player, or maybe a player's in decline, and you don't. The teams may have more information than you do, but I don't know what the plan is, the wide receiver. The Jets have to add a big-time receiver this offseason. And again, I'm all for drafting a receiver, but I'm not sure that drafting a receiver is necessarily going to fit what the Jets need immediately. Because this is, as much as the Jets are focused on the long term, 2022 is a really, really important year for Zach Wilson. They have a quarterback who needs to improve right now, based on the rookie year we just saw. And if we don't get big improvement out of Zach Wilson this year, we're going to be having a different discussion. So you have to do everything in your power to put this kid in a position to succeed. And if he doesn't succeed then that's on him. But I don't know what the plan is at receiver. And it's not just that I don't know the plan, it's that I don't see where suddenly the options have kind of disappeared. And, I'm sorry, bringing back Keelan Cole is not going to be enough. There's got to be some sort of big move. So, listen, I'm not saying it's over yet. I'm going to give the Jets time, but I am saying that, that this first stage, even though we're not even really at the official beginning of the offseason, the options have really dwindled for the Jets. So we'll have to see what they do. But of course, receiver's not the only position that needs to be addressed this offseason. There are plenty of moves the Jets have to make. And it's an exciting day on the NFL calendar as the legal tampering period begins. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about what that means, and we'll talk about some of the players to watch on this unofficial first day of free agency in the NFL. You know, NFL free agents must be paid in American currency. Teams cannot offer players Built Bars. But Built Bar is the most delicious protein bar on the market. In fact, it does not taste like a protein bar. It tastes like a candy bar because all bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low calorie and high protein. You can replace your candy bars with these. They're better. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories, but most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And there are so many delicious flavors. You've got mint brownie, you've got coconut, you've got coconut almond. And new for this month is white chocolate cookies and cream. These bars are all delicious and new flavors are coming out all the time. If they think a flavor might be good, they'll make it and it will be delicious and it will be good for you. So go check out all the Built Bar flavors at built.com. Again, that's built.com. BUILT.com for delicious Built Bars. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or your first watch every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Today is the unofficial beginning of free agency. It is the quote-unquote legal tampering period. Now, what does that mean? Well, in the NFL, you're not really allowed to talk to players. You're not allowed to negotiate with players who are under contract for another team. And those players are still technically under contract until Wednesday, which is the official beginning of the new league year. But the league instituted in 2013 this rule that the 2 days prior to the beginning of the new league year, you're allowed to begin speaking to the agents of free agents to be. So essentially, they moved up the start of free agency unofficially 2 days. Now, technically, you're not allowed to agree to a contract with these players during the legal tampering period. And if you follow the NFL free agency, you see how well teams adhere to that rule. And it's a totally illogical rule because if you're negotiating with somebody, how can you prevent them from agreeing to terms? How can you prevent them from concluding those negotiations? But the whole thing makes no sense. The reason the legal tampering period came into effect, and it came into effect in 2013, was that the league found that teams were breaking the rules and tampering with players before the beginning of free agency. So rather than dealing with that, and rather than punishing the teams that were breaking the rules, the league just decided to say, you know what, these 2 days tampering is legal. Now, what sort of incentive structure do you think that puts in? The fact that the league saw that teams were breaking the rules and said, you know what, we're just going to allow you to break the rules. It's now legal to break the rules. Do you think that makes tampering before the legal tampering period more likely or less likely? Now, maybe it's just me. I think that that's a little odd, but that's the league we live in right now. And yeah, you're allowed to tamper legally the 2 days before free agency. You just can't agree to terms with a player. And by the way, that rule gets broken all the time, and there's never any fallout from it. So NFL, it's making a lot of sense. But free agency unofficially begins to, except for players. So this is the other weird rule about the legal tampering period, is that teams are only allowed to speak to agents. They're not allowed to speak to players. And there are a few players, a handful of players who don't have agents. So these players have to wait till Wednesday. So, NFL just making all kinds of sense with its rules for free agency. But this is the unofficial beginning of free agency, and deals will be struck today. You'll see deals struck probably in the first hour because, believe it or not, I'm sure that there are some teams that have tampered, knowing that they're not going to get punished by the NFL for tampering. That's the league we live in. So it'll be interesting to see how active the Jets are on the first day of free agency. There's lots of rumors that they're going to be very, very big players in the early stages. There are rumors that they're not going to be big players in the early stages, and the rumors are all over the place because, a lot of these rumors, you see every year players the Jets are linked to who they have zero interest in because the players' agents trying to, make it sound like they're players in demand. So, and you see this all across the league. So it's very difficult to know what rumors to believe, what players the Jets will be interested in. And part of it's a question of what the Jets are going to prioritize this year. There are some guys I have my eyes on. If you look at the right tackle position, the right guard position, I mean, there are some guys, Laken Tomlinson, who plays with San Francisco, who has some history with the team. or has some history with the Jets coaching staff, because the Jets coaching staff obviously has a lot of guys who coach with the San Francisco 49ers. You've got Brandon Scherf, guy's a star guard for the Washington Commanders. He's been a very good player through his career, although that's a signing where if the Jets were interested in him, I would have some questions, because there's a guy who's missed about 1/3 of his games over the last 4 years. He's turning 30, and typically as players age, they don't get more durable, they get less durable. You have another guy, James Daniels, with the Chicago Bears, 24-year-old guard, very solid player one of the good players on a line that frankly isn't very good. So those are some of the areas the Jets could look to at the guard position. The tight end class is there's really not a lot there at this point. This is a tight end class that looked better than it turned out to be a few weeks ago, because Dalton Schultz gets tagged. Mike Gesicki, who I don't think the Jets were going to have interest in anyway, gets tagged. David Njoku out of Cleveland gets tagged. Zach Ertz, who, if the Jets wanted to go with an older option at tight end, just re-signed with the Cardinals yesterday, a new deal, a new multi-year deal. So the tight end market is looking not so. It'll be interesting to see what the Jets do. I mean, there are some guys there that can play. Max Williams out of Arizona, who is a good blocker. If you're looking at lower end option, Gerald Everett, a guy, Gerald Everett, the guy who's like kind of like one of those potential guys who has all this athletic ability, who's never been able to quite put it together. You see those guys all the time, and even though he's never been able to put it all together, he's better than what the Jets have had. So that could be a logical fit. Mo Alley Cox, a guy from the Colts, who I personally like, because he's already a good blocker. So at the bare minimum, you're getting a good blocker, but a guy who I think has the ability to become a threat in the receiving game. So the tight end position could be in play for the Jets. You look to the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I think all eyes are going to be mostly on the secondary. The Jets could surprise us. Maybe they'll sign a defensive lineman or a linebacker, but I would look to the secondary. And it's partially a question of, do the Jets prioritize the secondary? Because they have not to this point in Robert Saleh's tenure, but that could have just been a first-year thing. It could be, okay, we're going to focus on the defensive line first. Then we're going to focus on the secondary. And, you could look at corner, where there are rumors that the Jets may or may not be in on J.C. Jackson, who seems to be the top name. There are also rumors that the Jets could be in on Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay, who I kind of prefer. I kind of feel like would be a better scheme fit. Guy who kind of projects as a number one corner and, can play zone, can play man. I kind of like that one. And then you look to the safety position, and there are plenty of safeties out there. The Jets could go lower cost, but the question is, will they be in on the number one guy, which is Marcus Williams, clearly, because Bates out of Cincinnati got franchised. So Marcus Williams is the guy. Saints have a tight cap situation. Last year they lost Trey Hendrickson because of it. This year they may lose Marcus Williams because of it. Do the Jets want to pay big money at safety, though? Because that's the question. Because Joe Douglas, in his tenure with the Jets, has kind of been somebody who really adheres to positional value in a way maybe Mike McCagnon did not. Does Douglas really want to pay for a safety? And I understand the arguments for positional value. I think Marcus Williams would be a really good fit for this defense. I think he would help a lot of the issues the Jets have had, allowing big plays. A very steady guy at the back of the defense. I would not have a problem if the Jets gave him a fairly big money deal. Like, you could get out of control. I'm not saying you give Marcus Williams $20 million, but I think a guy who could be a pretty good fit for this defense. So those are some of the options, some of the names to watch. Whether the Jets will sign any of them or not today or tomorrow is unclear, but those are some of the things I'm watching, and it'll kind of give us a window into what the Jets really prioritize as they look to build this team. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will close out our show on this first day of the legal tampering period, and I'm going to try and advise you to stay calm, because it's very easy to get caught up in everything. It's very easy to panic. I preach that you stay calm, and I'll explain what I mean ahead here on this Monday episode of Locked On Jets. Of course, free agency means that we're in the NFL offseason. There are no games to bet on. However, college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. Yesterday was Selection Sunday after a week of the conference tournaments. And from all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs and info, because BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. I don't know who your Final Four is going to be. It's going to be an exciting tournament, but it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. It is the first day of the legal tampering period, and I'm going to end this show with a warning, or maybe just more some advice, just to try and not panic today, because I see this every single year in the Jets fan base. Noon hits, and there's always somebody who makes the joke at like 12:01, after the 1 minute after the legal tampering period begins, that, oh, the Jets haven't signed anybody, it's time to panic. Then, like less than an hour later, somebody says it, and it's for real, because the first player goes off the board, and the Jets probably aren't the team that signs the player, and you see other moves happen, and there always seems to be this abject panic in the fan base until the first big name signing is made. And then once the first big name signing is made, everybody calms down. But you have to remember that the first day of free agency are the deals that are given out to players that are so generous that like a player doesn't even think to negotiate. These deals are so good that the player's just like, oh, I'm going to sign this right here. I can't do better than this. And frequently they're among the worst deals that are signed. And we've seen this through the years with the Jets. How many big money deals have the Jets given out early in free agency that have come back and not been worth the money the Jets paid? So something to keep in mind. You know, last year, everybody was talking about, especially around the Super Bowl, how the Bengals dominated free agency last year. The Bengals gave out one contract last year that had more than $8 million in guaranteed money. And they had no contracts they gave out last year in free agency that had more than $16 million in guaranteed money. So, you know, winning free agency is not about giving out the biggest money deals. It's not about generating the most buzz today or tomorrow or even Wednesday. It's about finding the players who fit. And frequently the best deals are the ones that don't generate headlines, because there are players who are the right scheme fit for you. Every scheme is different. Every team requires a different skill set from various positions. And there might be a guy you get who wasn't a good fit for another team, so comes to you for kind of a low dollar deal, but is a great fit for your team. And ultimately in the NFL, and this is easier said than done, you kind of have to figure out a dollar amount. You know, how much value does a given player provide? And you have to try and strike a deal where you're paying less than the dollar amount that the player provides in value. It's not easy to find, but the best value deals are the ones people don't realize are value deals at the time you sign them. They only become evident during the season. So the Jets, you know, may or may not be active in this first day of free agency. I'm kind of guessing they won't be, but I wouldn't be shocked either way. I kind of lean towards the idea that they won't be, but am I going to be floored if they make a big money signing or two? No. But the important thing is to remember is that it's not about winning today. It's about winning games in the fall. And there's a very limited correlation between spending big in free agency and building your team up. So just something to keep in mind. Hopefully you can stay calm as you watch things unfold today. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to it and leave it a 5-star review. If you're listening on a podcast source or if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a thumbs up. Have a great Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.